My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 23 now, but the war that changed me started when I was just 10, the day I lost my mother. And unknowingly, my future. I remember the sound of my mom's breathing machine more vividly than I remember her voice. I was 10. She had fought pancreatic cancer for a year and a half, and by the time hospice was involved, I'd already memorized the shape of grief. My father, Gregory, told me we had to be strong, that she'd want us to move on, but I didn't know that moving on meant moving on from me. At her funeral, everyone wept politely. Gregory sobbed loudly. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't broken, but because something inside me already knew I had to stay quiet if I wanted to survive what came next. What I didn't know at the time, what nobody thought to explain to a grieving 10-year-old, was that my mom had left me everything. Her insurance payout, her savings, a structured trust totaling just over $120,000 left in my name, designated for my education and future. I was too young to manage it, so my dad was named the temporary trustee until I turned 18. He signed the papers at the attorney's office with shaking hands and said, "I promise I'll protect it like she's still here." Spoiler, he didn't. The first few years weren't terrible. I think he tried to hold it together. For a while, he cooked dinner. He helped with homework, but the cracks started showing when Cheryl entered the picture. She worked part-time at a boutique Greg shopped at occasionally. Always had glossy hair, soft pastel nails, and a gentle, oh, sweetie tone that made me instantly distrust her. Within 6 months, she was staying over, and by the following year, she'd moved in full-time. She never yelled, never raised her voice, but she erased my mother from the house like it was a smudge. Family photos, gone. My mom's scarves donated. The shelf that held my mother's favorite books replaced by succulents and antique spoons. Every time I mentioned my mom, Cheryl would say, "Your mother was a wonderful woman, Rachel, but we have to let go of the past to build something new." And my father, spinelessly, would nod. At 15, I asked a question I'd been carrying around for years. "Where's the money Mom left me?" I'll never forget the look Gregory gave me, equal parts guilt and condescension, like I was a naive child asking about fairy dust. "Rachel, we used it. Cheryl and I invested in our future. We opened Morgan Interiors with that money. Our," a word that slammed into my gut harder than I expected. I stared at him, numb. "You used my money. It wasn't just your money," he snapped. "It was meant to help the family. And what kind of life would you even have at 18? You'd blow it on clothes or stupid college clubs. You stole from me." He laughed. That moment, it split me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I excused myself, locked the bathroom door, and dry heaved into the sink until my eyes blurred. That night, I opened my mom's old journal. Buried inside was a letter to Rachel, "Open when you feel forgotten." I read one line over and over. "If they ever try to erase what I left for you, don't just cry. Fight." The next 3 years were survival mode. I finished high school, took a part-time job at the campus coffee shop, applied for financial aid behind Gregory's back. And when I turned 18, I packed my bags while he was out at a Chamber of Commerce brunch and walked out without a goodbye. He never called. When I moved into a studio apartment in South Austin at 18, I had exactly $213 in my checking account and a community college scholarship that covered 40% of tuition. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I took on shifts at a 24-hour coffee shop off Lamar Boulevard and enrolled in paralegal studies because I needed a job that paid more than tips and because I had unfinished business. Every day, I passed a mirror in my cramped bathroom. Taped above it were 5 words from my mother's journal: "Don't just cry. Fight. Win." That became my doctrine. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to reclaim what was stolen. For the first few months, I didn't know where to begin. I mean, how does someone like me, barely scraping by, no connections, no legal knowledge, stand a chance against someone like my father, who now wore a Rolex and chaired local business fundraisers with Cheryl smiling at his side? But I had one thing he didn't. Evelyn Ross. She was my mom's best friend in college and the same estate attorney who had drafted my mom's will. She hadn't been in our lives much after the funeral. Cheryl had a way of shutting people out with a thank you. But we're simplifying family. But I remembered her. I found her firm online, sent an email with the subject line, "I think he stole my inheritance. Can we talk?" She responded in less than 15 minutes. The first time I sat across from Evelyn again, I could barely hold eye contact. My hands trembled. I was afraid she'd say I waited too long, afraid it was legally too late, afraid no one would believe me. But she looked me in the eyes, just like she did when I was a kid, and said, "Rachel, I never trusted that man. Let's get to work." It started with the original documents. Evelyn still had them meticulously filed, notarized, and dated. The will clearly stated that the funds were to be held in trust for me until I turned 18. They were not to be touched. No clauses, no loopholes. What Gregory did wasn't a gray area. It was theft. Felony grade. What we needed was proof. She filed a request through the courts to obtain banking and investment records from the trust account. We had to prove misappropriation, not just that the money was gone, but that it was deliberately redirected. I went to work during the day and stayed up at night reading civil statutes, learning how fiduciary duty worked, scribbling case law in the margins of my ramen-stained notebooks. The more I read, the more furious I became. My father hadn't just betrayed my mother's last wishes. He had weaponized them to fund a new life with a new wife. While I scrambled to afford textbooks and did laundry at a 24-hour laundromat surrounded by strangers sleeping on folding chairs, when the first batch of documents came in from the bank, Evelyn and I spread them across her office floor like a mosaic of betrayal. At first glance, the withdrawals looked like standard account activity. But Evelyn had a gift. She spotted a pattern. Each withdrawal lined up perfectly with a deposit into a business account under the name M.I. Austin LLC. I had never heard of it. She smiled thinly and pulled up the state business registry. M.I. stood for Morgan Interiors. I felt sick. He didn't even bother changing the name. But what really sent the rage through my bloodstream like fire was the authorization form. There it was, my name, signed in neat cursive, dated exactly 1 week after my 13th birthday. I didn't remember signing anything. And of course I didn't, because I hadn't. Evelyn compared it to the signature on my learner's permit. The slant. The letter forms. The loops completely different. She exhaled slowly. This is forgery. I felt the room tilt. I wasn't just betrayed. I was counterfeited. My father hadn't just taken my money. He had impersonated me to do it. And Cheryl well. She was listed as the co-signer and managing partner on the business account. It wasn't just my father. It was both of them. A team. Against me. We took it to court. The filing went in under breach of fiduciary duty and conversion of trust property. I didn't expect it to move quickly, and it didn't. My father lawyered up instantly. Cheryl released a passive-aggressive public statement through their business Facebook page about false accusations from a deeply troubled young woman clinging to past trauma. And then, the calls started. From my uncle, from my dad's church buddies, even from Cheryl's cousin Karen, who I hadn't spoken to since I was 12 and who now felt compelled to message me on Instagram with something like, "Don't let bitterness consume you. Think of Liam." Ah, yes, Liam. My half-brother, 10 years old, sweet kid. Once, he used to call me Ray Ray before Cheryl gently corrected him to Rachel. I used to read him picture books when he couldn't sleep. But over time, Cheryl built walls between us, subtle, polite walls. Like assigning him a different playroom, or not letting him take snacks from my side of the pantry. By the time I moved out, He barely looked at me, so no. I wasn't going to let guilt over a boy who didn't even remember me stop me from getting justice. The trial stretched across months, then a year. My father's lawyer delayed every motion possible. Claimed the business was operating at a loss. Claimed the withdrawals were inadvertent. At one point, he tried to claim I had consented verbally. Evelyn almost laughed in court. But what they didn't expect was that I had grown sharper every time they made a false claim. We had receipts. We had bank statements. We had my mother's handwritten instructions. And finally, we had Cheryl's email, forwarded from a whistleblower accountant who'd quit the business after learning the truth. It read, "If we do it before she's 16, she won't remember. Besides, I'm sure Greg can handle the signature." When we submitted that into evidence, my father's lawyer went pale. The judge scheduled closing arguments. I sat in the courtroom, knees bouncing under the table, eyes fixed on my father as he adjusted his cufflinks and whispered something to Cheryl. It was strange seeing them like that, like business partners watching an investment unravel. Not once did he look at me. Not once did he show remorse. As the verdict neared, I felt that same tightness in my chest I had the day I asked about my mom's money. The same sickness. But this time, I wasn't a powerless kid. I was a woman with facts, documents, law, and a mother's voice echoing in my head. Don't just cry, fight. I didn't know what the judge would say yet. I didn't know how far this would go. But I knew one thing for sure. I was about to become the storm he never thought I could be. The day of the verdict. The sky outside was cloudless and blue, an insultingly peaceful backdrop for what felt like the climax of a war that had chewed away my insides for years. I arrived early, wearing a black blazer I borrowed from Evelyn. The sleeves too long, the shoulders too wide. She didn't say anything about the fit, just looked at me and whispered, "Today, you get to tell the truth. And this time, they can't talk over you." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Beige walls, fluorescent lights that hummed faintly, a wooden bench where I sat alone, 2 rows behind the plaintiff's table, hands gripping a spiral notebook with nothing written in it. Cheryl sat next to my father in the defense section, perfectly composed in a cream blouse, not a hair out of place. My father didn't even glance back at me. He was too busy whispering to his lawyer, smirking, as if this were just another meeting on his schedule. Something he could close with a handshake and a shrug. The judge was a woman, early 60s maybe, stern but calm. When she walked in, the air changed. My stomach clenched. My mouth dried out. Evelyn leaned over and said softly, "No matter what she says, you've already done something most people never find the courage to do." But I wasn't here for courage. I was here for blood. Figuratively. Legally. Precisely. The judge cleared her throat and began. She walked through the findings with surgical precision: how the trust was set up in my name, how the will stated its sole purpose was to support my education and future development, how my father, as trustee, had legal and moral duty to protect it until I turned 18. Then she outlined the timeline of the withdrawals, the forged signature on the release authorization, the business formation documents, and Cheryl's email to the accountant. Her voice never rose, but each word landed like a hammer. My father shifted in his seat. Cheryl folded and unfolded her hands until her knuckles turned white. I sat so still I thought my spine would snap. And then the judge said the words I had carried inside my chest like a prayer I didn't dare speak aloud. "This court finds that Gregory Morgan and Cheryl Morgan knowingly and unlawfully misappropriated the trust funds designated for Rachel Morgan, and are liable for full restitution with interest. Further penalties are imposed due to forgery and breach of fiduciary duty." My vision blurred for a second. I think I forgot how to breathe. Evelyn squeezed my knee under the table. I looked at my father finally, and for the first time in my life. He looked small. Not humbled, not sorry. Just cornered. Like a man who thought he could play God with someone else's future and realized too late he was playing checkers in a chess game. We walked out in silence. Outside. Evelyn hugged me and said she would be so proud of you. I wanted to believe her, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt emptied, like everything I had burned for, fought for, finally landed, and all I could do was stand in the ashes, wondering what kind of life could grow from here. In the following weeks, the consequences hit hard and fast. The court ordered the business to be liquidated. Morgan Interiors, the boutique that had once been in every Austin home magazine, shut down within a month. Furniture piled into storage units. Their clients quietly vanished. My father tried to delay repayment by filing an appeal, but the evidence was airtight, and the appeal was rejected in less than 2 weeks. His wages were garnished, their savings account seized. I received the first wire transfer from the restitution judgment in early spring. It was more than just numbers in my account. It was the sound of a door unlocking from the inside. I could have taken the money and disappeared, but something inside me, something raw and unfinished, needed more than closure. I wanted to reclaim my voice, not just my funds. I used a portion of the money to create a scholarship in my mother's name for girls in foster care who'd lost a parent. The rest I put toward finishing my degree. I transferred to UT Austin and completed a legal assistant certification. Within a year, I landed a job at a law firm that specialized in estate fraud. Ironically, some of our clients were exactly like me, children whose futures had been compromised by the greed of the people who claimed to love them most. I sat with teenagers who spoke in cold, flat tones about betrayals they couldn't fully name. I knew that tone. I'd worn it for years, and every time I helped them get justice, I felt something inside me inch closer to healed. But winning in court didn't mean peace at home. My paternal family fractured. Cousins stopped calling. My aunt sent a long passive-aggressive email saying she hoped I felt good about turning Liam's life upside down. Cheryl posted vague Facebook statuses about betrayal and people you raised turning into strangers. My father, he never spoke to me again. No apology, no acknowledgement, just nothing. Then one night, 3 months after the ruling, I got a Facebook message from an account I didn't recognize at first. It was Liam. His profile photo was blurry, clearly taken from a school field trip. His message was short: "I don't know what happened, but I remember when you used to read me books. I miss that." I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me ached. Another part whispered, "He doesn't understand. Don't open that door." I didn't respond. A week later, Cheryl messaged me herself. Longer, polished, manipulative. She said Liam was struggling in school, that their lives had been completely wrecked, that she hoped I could see beyond the past and remember we're still family. Still family. After everything. After erasing my mother. After smiling while robbing me blind. She dared to play the unity card. I never replied. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, my silence was no longer powerlessness. It was a boundary. And it was firm. But even as I built something new job, new apartment, new purpose, there were moments when the past crept in through cracks I didn't know were still open. Like the time I walked by my father's now empty storefront and saw the for lease sign swaying in the breeze. Or the day I opened an old shoebox and found a crayon drawing of me and Liam under a rainbow, labeled "Me and Ray Ray Forever." I hadn't realized I still had it. I hadn't realized how much it could still hurt. And then there was the letter. On my 23rd birthday, Evelyn handed me a white envelope sealed with gold wax. "Your mom gave this to me the day she finalized her will," she said. "Told me to wait until you were ready." My hands shook as I opened it. My mother's handwriting, elegant, firm, and heartbreakingly familiar, filled the page. She wrote about love, about courage, about forgiveness. But one line stayed with me more than anything. "If they try to take from you what I left behind, Don't just protect it, defend your future like it's your birthright. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my wallet, where it still lives. Because that's what she gave me. Not just a fund, not just a war, but a name, and a reason, and the quiet, burning belief that I deserved better than silence. And in some ways, the real reckoning had only just begun. Winning in court didn't mean winning in life. People forget that. They think the gavel hits and your soul exhales. That restitution equals resolution. But the truth is, victory comes quietly. And healing doesn't always follow. When the final payment landed in my account, I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't feel powerful. I felt disconnected. The number looked surreal, like someone else's future had been grafted onto my reality. I sat on my thrifted couch, in my tiny one-bedroom apartment, holding a check that should have opened doors but instead left me asking, what now? I kept moving because that's what I'd trained myself to do. I finished school, updated my resume, applied for internships, and eventually landed a role as a legal assistant at a mid-sized estate law firm in downtown Austin. The irony didn't escape me. I spent my days drafting legal notices to people who had done exactly what my father had done, exploited the vulnerable, siphoned inheritances, falsified trust amendments. Each file was a mirror. I read line after line of betrayal, familiar in its patterns, precise in its cruelty. I watched adult children sob in conference rooms, elderly clients tremble as they signed power of attorney documents, and I knew how they felt not in theory, but in my bones. Still, I was good at the work, focused, efficient, maybe too efficient. My supervisor once told me I had an unnerving ability to compartmentalize. She meant it as a compliment. I took it as a warning, because while I kept up the image of stability well-fitted blazers, clean casework, polite laughter in office kitchens inside, the fracture lines remained. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night from dreams where I was 15 again, screaming at my father in the kitchen. The words stuck in my throat like cement. Other nights, I'd dream I was sitting on the witness stand, and the judge turned into my mother, shaking her head in disappointment. The guilt didn't hit all at once. It arrived in fragments, small and sharp. Like when I walked past a father holding his daughter's backpack on the subway platform, or when I saw a kid at the park trying to impress his dad with a clumsy soccer kick. There was no reason for me to ache at the sight, and yet it gnawed at something soft inside me. I hated that I still wanted something from Gregory: validation, apology, even just recognition of what he'd done. But the silence from his side remained total. He wasn't sorry. He was only sorry he lost. And yet, even knowing that, I sometimes wondered if I'd gone too far. Those thoughts started multiplying when the holidays came. Thanksgiving arrived cold and wet, and I didn't get a single invitation from my paternal family. I wasn't surprised, but I did get a postcard, no return address, just a generic winter scene and 5 words, "Hope you're proud of yourself." It was postmarked from San Marcos, where my father's sister lived. I didn't cry, but I did leave it face down on the windowsill for 2 weeks, unable to throw it away. Not because it hurt, but because part of me needed proof that I hadn't imagined all of this, that my isolation wasn't self-inflicted. The hardest moment came a few weeks later, when I bumped into someone I hadn't seen in nearly a decade, Ms. Jennings, my old elementary school teacher. I was buying groceries. She recognized me before I saw her. "Rachel," she gasped. "My God, you've grown into her." I knew she meant my mother. The resemblance wasn't lost on anyone who knew her. We chatted briefly, but then she said something that split me open in the middle of that fluorescent-lit produce aisle. "I heard what happened. You were so brave. But I hope you can find a way to forgive him. It's not for him, it's for you." I smiled politely, but inside, I wanted to scream. Forgive him, forgive Cheryl. For what? For destroying my future so theirs could flourish. for leaving me to fight alone while they played house with my money. What part of that deserved absolution, still? Her words haunted me, because some nights, when I was honest with myself, I wasn't sure who I was punishing anymore, my father or myself. That winter, I poured myself into pro bono work. Evelyn had opened a small clinic for victims of financial elder abuse and invited me to help. The stories were brutal daughters cutting off their mother's medication to access savings accounts, sons tricking dementia patients into signing over deeds. But amidst all that darkness, there were moments of connection that kept me going. A teenage girl who cried in my office when I told her it wasn't her fault. A woman in her 60s who hugged me after we froze her nephew's account. Those were the moments I felt closest to my mother. Like I was doing what she would have wanted. Like I was turning pain into purpose. Then, one Friday afternoon, just as we were closing the office, Evelyn handed me a sealed envelope. "This came for you," she said. "Delivered by hand. No name." Inside was a folded letter. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Liam. He was older now, his pen strokes shaky but determined. "I don't remember everything," he wrote, "but I do remember how you used to make up bedtime stories about dogs who could fly. I know Mom says a lot of bad things about you, but I just want to know your side. I want to understand." At the bottom, he'd written a phone number. Just a number. No pressure, no expectation. I stared at the letter for hours. My brain replayed every interaction we'd ever had. Every time he clung to my leg. Every time Cheryl told him to let go. He was just a kid. He'd always been just a kid. But was that enough? Could I open that door without letting in everything I'd worked so hard to leave behind? That night, I sat on my apartment floor, the letter beside me, my mother's voice echoing in my head. Not the one from the tapes or the journal, but the imagined one. The one I talked to when things got hard. I asked her, "What now?" "Mom, I fought. I won. But why does it still feel unfinished?" I waited, as if the walls would respond. They didn't. But somewhere deep in my chest, something shifted. Because maybe this wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about facing it on my own terms. I didn't call Liam right away. The letter sat in my drawer for days. Then weeks. I would see it when I reached for a pen or tucked away receipts just enough for my breath to hitch. Part of me feared that calling him would unravel everything I had rebuilt. I had crafted my life with sharp lines and firm boundaries. I couldn't risk letting anyone cross them. Even someone who once clung to my hand like it was the only safe thing in the world. But there was another part, quieter, persistent. That whispered if justice was really the end of this story. Why did it still feel like something was unfinished? I called on a Sunday afternoon. The sky was a flat gray. The kind of weather that makes everything feel suspended. The phone rang 3 times, and then his voice. Still boyish, but deeper now. Cautious. "Hello," for a second. I couldn't speak. Then finally, "It's Rachel." A pause. Then a slow exhale. "I was hoping it was you." We didn't dive into the past. We talked about school, about music, about his terrible math teacher, and the fact that he now loved astronomy. He asked me if I remembered the story about the flying dog who lived on the moon. I told him I did. Then, quietly, he asked the question I knew was coming. "Why did you do it?" I swallowed hard. "Because it was mine," I said. "Because they took something that didn't belong to them and pretended it was okay. And because if I didn't fight for myself, no one else would." He didn't say anything for a while. Then Mom says, "You ruined everything." His voice cracked a little. "But I think she's wrong." That line broke something open in me. We didn't speak long, just 20 minutes. But when we hung up, I didn't feel hollow. I felt anchored, not because it healed everything, but because it reminded me that not all damage is permanent. Some fractures don't mend, but others, you can build something through the cracks. In the weeks that followed, Liam and I texted occasionally, never too deep, never too often, just enough to feel like there was still a thread between us, thin but intact. I didn't tell him much about our father. He didn't ask. I think we both understood some truths were too heavy to pass down. One afternoon, I got an email from Cheryl. Short, measured, almost corporate. I heard you spoke to Liam. I hope you won't confuse him further. He's been through enough. I didn't reply. Not out of pettiness, but out of clarity. There are some people you don't reason with. Some people aren't villains in the cinematic sense, they're just deeply selfish. Pathologically skilled at rewriting history. And no amount of explanation will change that. I had no intention of redeeming myself in Cheryl's eyes. I didn't need her understanding. I had my own. Still, there were moments quiet, creeping moments when the what-ifs returned. What if my father had just apologized? What if Cheryl had chosen honesty over ambition? What if I'd waited until Liam was older to act, but regret is a spiral with no bottom? And the truth remained. I had fought for something that was mine. I hadn't lied. I hadn't stolen. I hadn't manipulated. I had demanded justice. That was my line in the sand, and I had stood on the right side of it. That fall, I attended a small legal conference in Dallas. It wasn't glamorous. A Holiday Inn ballroom with stale coffee and overpriced pastries. But during one panel, the speaker said something that stopped me cold. Justice isn't about righting every wrong. It's about drawing a line between who we were and who we refuse to become. I wrote it down, then underlined it twice. Because that was the heart of it, wasn't it? I didn't fight for the money. I fought to not become someone who allowed herself to be erased. I fought to prove to them, but mostly to myself, that my mother's voice didn't end the day she died. It lived in me. In every objection I filed, every document I read, every time I looked someone in the eye and said, "No, that's not acceptable." Months passed. I grew into my life more fully. I moved into a new apartment, painted the walls myself, bought real furniture. I started dating someone, a quiet, patient man named Jordan, who never asked too many questions too soon. I told him bits and pieces when I was ready. He listened without fixing, without judging. One night, I let him read my mother's last letter. He cried. Then, just as the first hints of spring touched the air, I received a voicemail from a blocked number. It was my father. His voice sounded older, worn, like someone who'd been living under a weight he never expected to carry. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I should have protected you. I failed. I don't have an excuse. I just wanted you to hear it from me, even if it's too late." I played that voicemail 3 times. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need his apology to validate my pain. I didn't need his voice to close the chapter. I had already done that. On my terms. On the anniversary of the court ruling, I stood outside what used to be Morgan Interiors. The windows were covered in dust. A for lease sign still dangled from the door. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. I reached into my bag, pulled out a folded piece of paper, my mother's letter, and read it one last time. Then I walked away. Because some legacies are worth fighting for. And some ghosts you leave behind, if you've ever had to reclaim what was yours. Fight for a voice that others tried to silence. Or draw a line in the sand and say, No more. I see you. Drop a comment below. Share your story. Because stories like this, they're not rare. They're just rarely told from the side that fought back. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this story moved you. And remember, healing isn't loud, but it is real.